Well, thank you all very much for being here this night for our last journey through Hymnody. Tonight we've only got about 200 years to get through, but there's a lot that happens in these 200 years. So just to review, first of all, in our first week, we talked about ancient Jewish chant and then the more elaborate music that was heard in the temple. That grew into Ambrosian chant in Milan. And then Pope Gregory I organized and compiled all these chants that were happening throughout Europe into Gregorian chants. And then we kind of finished up by talking about the rich poetry that was flourishing in the monasteries in the Middle Ages. And last week, we got to the Reformation, and we talked about the professor, theologian Martin Luther in Germany, and Jean Calvin in France, who had to escape to Switzerland, who had to escape to Germany, John Calvin. And then we also talked about King Henry VIII, who started the Church of England so that he could divorce his wife and hopefully have a male heir, very practical reasons there. And then we talked about Isaac Watts, the scientist, philosopher, who also wrote a lot of hymns. And then the Wesley brothers, John and Charles Wesley, who wrote 6,000 hymns, both of them active at Oxford University with the Holy Club. And it was John Wesley who went on then to start the Methodist Church. So now you're all caught up. So tonight, we're actually going to pick up the story again at Oxford University, but we're now about 50 years later in the 1830s. And there was a movement at Oxford appropriately called the Oxford Movement. Not a very creative title. Well, the Oxford Movement, some of you might be familiar with it, led to something that we commonly call now Anglo-Catholicism, the Anglo-Catholic Church. And if you think of that, you might automatically associate it with smells and bells. And you would be right. There's a lot of smells and bells involved in Anglo-Catholic worship. But there's a lot more to Anglo-Catholic worship. I had the good fortune of being assistant organist at St. Mary the Virgin in New York City for a couple of years. So very familiar with Anglo-Catholic worship. I also worked at another Episcopal church for a couple of years that was so low that they referred to the sacristy as the funnel room because they poured consecrated wine back into the bottle through a funnel. So I worked in 3 Episcopal churches before I came here to St. Paul's, and very low to very high. But continuing on with Anglo-Catholic worship, one of the primary things that the Oxford movement did was make the Eucharist the primary worship event once again. So in England, anything that was Catholic from basically the 16th century on, you could get burned at the stake pretty easily for anything that was Catholic. So the Anglo-Catholic movement was bringing some of these traditions back. And so the Eucharist was one of them, but also an awareness, a focus on the liturgical year. So, and there was a lot of richness to that as well, bringing back the saints' days. There was bringing back beauty and splendor in worship services. And a lot of things that we now maybe just even take for granted, but the Oxford movement, the Anglo-Catholic movement, were actively bringing a lot of these things back. And when in regards to hymnody, they were very interested in going back to ancient texts, even Greek and Latin texts, and translating them into English to be used in hymns. And some of those hymns we commonly sing now, like O Come Emmanuel, or in a couple of weeks, we're going to be singing All Glory, Laud, and Honor. So I pulled up All Glory, Laud, and Honor as our first hymn for this evening. This was written in the 9th century. The original text was written in the 9th century by Bishop Theodore of Orleans. And originally, All Glory, Laud, and Honor had 38 verses.
Oh my gosh.
38 verses. Can you imagine? That would have been a long Palm Sunday procession. Let's just sing a verse of All Glory, Laud, and Honor, everybody. Here's the end of the. I would say that Anglo Catholics were very interested in the splendor and beauty of worship. And one of those Anglo-Catholic hymn writers named John Riley wrote a text that is one of my absolute favorites because it really shows that when we're singing hymns, we are joining our voices with the angels in heaven. We are joining our voices with all the generations that have come before us. And we are joining our voices even with all the generations yet to come. And just listen to these words by John Riley. Ye watchers and ye holy ones, bright seraphs, cherubim, and thrones, raise the glad strain. Cry out dominions, princedoms, powers, virtues, archangels, angels, choirs. O higher than the cherubim, more glorious than the seraphim, lead their praises. Thou bearer of the eternal word, most gracious, magnify the Lord. Respond, ye souls, in endless rest, ye patriarchs and prophets blessed, ye holy 12, ye martyrs strong, all saints triumphant, raise the psalm. O friends, in gladness, let us sing supernal anthems echoing to God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit, three in one. Just what it just captures the splendor, the glory, the beauty of worship, just right there in those very words. Well, two Anglo-Catholic priests, William Denton and Francis Murray, in the 1860s, began collecting hymns into what they called hymns ancient and modern. I'm going to just pass these around. Now, these are two reprints of hymns ancient and modern. I actually have a 1906 version of this hymnal, but when I pulled it off my bookshelf, I realized that the cover has completely disintegrated and most of the pages are loose. And I love you all, but I did want to pass that hymnal around. So these are two reprints of hymns ancient and modern. Now it's called hymns ancient because about half of the text in this hymnal, half were translations of Latin and Greek text into English. It was called hymns modern because it picked up that thread from Watts and Wesley and incorporated a lot of modern hymns of the 19th century. And one of those modern hymns of the 19th century was the Church's One Foundation, which was written for the first Lambeth Conference in 1867. So let's just sing a verse of the Church's One Foundation. Hymns Ancient and Modern was an Anglo-Catholic hymnal that was bringing old texts back to life in English, often associated with newer tunes, but was also compiling and bringing together this rich hymnody that had formed by the 19th century. Along with the Anglo-Catholic movement in England, there were a lot of individuals that were expressing their personal faith and piety through hymn text. And from just individuals in England, you get from Augustus Toplady, Rock of Ages cleft for me. Or you get William Cowper's Just for a Closer Walk with God. But most importantly, most famous of all, John Newton's Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound. Now, John Newton was not a saint. When he was a young man in his 20s, he was a sailor and then became a captain on a slave ship. So he was part of the slave trade and going to Africa to pick up Africans and then transporting them to America or other destinations here in the New World. He did this for several years, and during that time, he had a reputation for being the worst of the worst. He was not a good person at all. There was a storm at sea when he was captain, and he was below decks as the storm was occurring. But as he was going up to the top deck, he got there just in time to see the person, I forget this person's name, who was steering the ship. There's a name for this. But that person got swept off the ship by the storm, and John Newton ended up taking the wheel of the ship. And while he was holding onto this wheel for hours during the storm, he had a conversion experience. And he said to God, if you get me out of this experience, I will stop being a terrible person and stop transporting people into slavery. Well, the ship got out of the storm, and he did leave the slave trade. And after several years, he even became an Anglican priest in England. And John Newton, as a priest, now I'm about 20 years after the storm at sea, when he was a priest, he had the habit of writing a hymn every week. And one of those hymns was Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, that saved a wretch like me. And John Newton was speaking from personal experience in that moment. So let's just sing a verse of Amazing Grace, everybody. We actually don't know a lot about that tune. John Newton wrote the words, but that tune didn't go with the words originally. And that tune is possibly an African-American spiritual folk song. It's also possible it came from England, Scotland. We will probably never know the exact origin of the tune, Amazing Grace. A generation after Hymns Ancient and Modern came the English hymnal, the New English hymnal. This was edited, compiled primarily by Ralph Vaughan Williams, or as his wife liked to call him, Ralph. Ralph Vaughan Williams. I think she was the only one who could call him that. The English hymnal came around in about 1906, and this was it built on the foundation of hymns ancient and modern. It kept compiling hymns by the Christian year. There's a lot of hymns for the saints in here. But what Vaughan Williams did, which was really refreshing and revolutionary, was he included a lot of English folk tunes. So in here you get the English folk tune Greensleeves, For What Child Is This, Aberystwyth, Kingsfold, Forest Green. Lots of English folk tunes make their appearance in this hymnal. The other thing that was remarkable about this hymnal was the fact that it was written at the time that Charles Hubert Hastings Parry was active, and Charles Villiers Stanford and John Ireland, just a lot of great English composers, along with Vaughan Williams himself. So a lot of the hymns in here also are fairly advanced. The melodies kind of leap around. There's a lot going on harmonically. And what they were assuming by 1906 was that congregations had parish choirs or cathedral choirs to support the singing. So hymn writing became a lot more advanced by the time you get to the early 20th century with this hymnal. Let me just pass this around, a little more show and tell. So as an example of a little more advanced hymnody, let's sing "Oh Praise Ye the Lord" by Charles Parry. You'll see what I mean right away. This is a little more complex. Sorry about that. But you see what I mean? The melody's hopping all over the place. The harmonies are a lot more advanced. There's just more chromaticism. So the more advanced hymnody and the folk tunes were the two things that really got introduced with the English hymnal of 1906. Well, before I leave the 19th century, I want to hop from what was happening in England and come over here to America, because there was a lot happening on this side of the ocean as well. The most important, the most significant, the largest body of American folk music comes from the African American tradition. And in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century here in America, Africans were enslaved, and they brought with them from Africa a rich singing tradition. Singing in Africa, singing and dancing, because they both go together, is just a primary central part of everyday life. I had the great experience of going to South Africa a couple years ago and realizing how common it is in South Africa to sing or hear singing, or it's just around you all the time. And so I have to think it was that way centuries ago, and it certainly is still that way now throughout much of Africa. So they came from this rich musical heritage, and they came to America, and they were often punished if they were singing their own songs. But they learned that they could sing Christian spirituals, Christian hymns. And so they developed a lot of their own music, which is a rich body of repertoire. And what the slave owners didn't realize is that very often in those hymns, there were coded messages. So steal away to Jesus was an incitement to run away. Steal away, run away. And I got my ticket was an instruction to get on the Underground Railroad. If I got my ticket, I can ride. So, and then any reference to the river Jordan was a reference, a code language for the Ohio River. So if I cross the River Jordan, then you have to cross the Ohio River because the Ohio River was the border. So there's so many of these African American spirituals ride on King Jesus. No man can hinder me. King Jesus rides a milk white horse. The River Jordan he did cross. Wade in the water. These are all instructions for freedom. And so they learned that they could sing these hymns even with the white master listening. They could sing these hymns and instruct each other on how to escape. And most famously of all, Harriet Tubman sang. She's the woman who was free in the North and went repeatedly into the South to find slaves and bring them north to safety. Well, the song she used to identify herself and to find these people was Go Down Moses. So let's sing Harriet Tubman's song that she used, Go Down Moses. Let my people go. You just imagine her walking through the woods in the dark and let my people go. There was another vein of hymnody happening in America in the 18th, 19th century, and it's called shape notes. I'm going to pass around 3 of my shape note hymnals. There you go. And as you look at the notation in these hymnals, you will notice that it doesn't look like modern notation. The Americans who came up with shape note singing were incredibly innovative. They came up with a whole different style of notation that never existed before. It was completely unique to them, just them alone. It lasted only a short time throughout America, and it continued in the South under a different name. In the South, you would hear it called Southern Harmony or Sacred Harp. So the Southern Harmony and Sacred Harp really refers to the outgrowth of shape note singing. And we actually sang a hymn this past Sunday in the Southern Harmony, the shape note tradition. And I actually, in the packet, you'll see that hymn, Wondrous Love. And the first version in the packet is the shape note version. And so you see like there's little squiggles, triangles, and squares, and round dots. All those symbols told, if you understood what they meant, told you exactly the pitch to sing. So you didn't need like so much lines and every good boy deserves, all that. It was a different way of reading notation. So I gave you the shape note version just so you would see it. But if you turn the page, you have the modern version that we actually sang this past Sunday. Now, in the shape note tradition, you certainly didn't sit at a dinner table to sing your hymn. You stood up and you got in a circle or square. So we're all going to stand up now, and you don't need to be perfect about it, but let's try to get a circle, square kind of formation. Bring the music with you. All right. And in the shape note tradition of singing, a song leader just kind of does this. So conducting is not this European style. It's just one, like that. Here we go. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, that caused the Lord of bliss to lay aside his crown for my soul, to lay aside his crown for my soul. That was just way too beautiful. Yeah, shape note singing is loud, primarily loud. It's not pretty. Shape note singing is very nasal and gritty. It's earthy because there's no formal singing training at all. So think nasal, think loud, and you got to really get into it. I'll give you a little sample. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul. It's just loud. All right, are you ready for this?
Yep.
Here we go. One. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, that caused the Lord of bliss to lay aside his crown for my soul, to lay aside his crown for my soul. You're getting there. Good for you.
Joy, could I add a little bit?
Yeah.
I went to school at Sewanee Seminary, and
Yeah.
so that is every diocese of the province 4 has a bishop's seat at the Sewanee Chapel, 28 owning dioceses. But Marion Hatchett, who was one of the chairs of the hymnal committee, was one of my professors.
Wow.
And he was old, and he drove my late husband and I down to Alabama to a homecoming, a Sacred Heart homecoming. And the church was filled with people who'd grown up singing it, and they'd come back. And they have 4-part harmony. And what I learned is there's a lot of it on YouTube.
Yeah, there is.
So if you do that, you just get inspired by the spirit of the loudness.
Yeah.
They just yell it.
Yeah. Thanks, Maria. Thank you. How's he, everybody? Yeah, you can hear Shape Note Society singing in that tradition, and it's worth the experience. And at least in Chicago, there was a monthly gathering of Shape Note singers. And if you poke around, you probably find something. I mean, with Pennsylvania being fairly close by, I would think that there's Shape Note singing. But there are people that are still dedicated to keeping that singing tradition that's so thoroughly American, keeping that tradition alive. But there was one person that was not interested in keeping Shape Note singing alive. His name was Lowell Mason, and he was in Boston. Lowell Mason, 1792 to 1872, was a banker and a part-time church musician. But Lowell Mason really believed that European style of singing was better than that shape note American style of singing. And so Lowell Mason pushed shape note singing really out of Boston and the North, and that's why it became more of a Southern tradition, Southern harmony and Sacred Heart tradition. Lowell Mason was part of the Haydn and Handel Society in Boston and wrote about 1,600 hymns. Many of his hymns were published in a hymnal in 1822 in Boston. And one of those hymns I'm very partial to is Nearer My God to Thee. So let's all sing Lowell Mason's setting of Nearer My God to Thee.
You're not gonna speak.
I want to speak.
No, wait.
Okay.
Not sure what that was. Lowell Mason really gets the credit for inviting congregations to sing in 4-part harmony. And so he wrote his hymns with a harmony intended to be sung by everyone. And that in itself was a revolutionary idea. Well, soon after and concurrent with Lowell Mason, you get a trend in America focused on children and hymns that were written intentionally for Sunday school. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Those hymns were very effective and very, very well loved.
Question on Zoom.
Ah, okay. Quest away.
Julian, go ahead.
Yes. I don't know whether it's legend or whether it's a fact that's carried on, but Nearer My God to Thee was supposedly what the orchestra on the Titanic was playing when things were starting to look pretty grim.
Thank you, Julian. You're absolutely right. My next lecture is about the Titanic, so I'm very much looking forward to that. So, and don't get me started now, because I'll go for an hour or two down that path. Back to history of hymnody. William Bradbury wrote "Jesus Loves Me" and many, many other beloved hymns. "Sweet Hour of Prayer" and "Just as I Am." Simple harmonies, simple melodies, but so easily remembered. So let's just sing next here, "Just as I Am." And how many people remember Billy Graham revivals? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this hymn just is perfect for that altar call moment. So "Just as I Am." A lot of these 19th century American hymns have a reference to the blood that was shed, or references to life everlasting, or perils, and then the opposite of perils, that salvation waiting in heaven. And a lot of it is all tied up in the trauma from the Civil War. So, so many of these 19th century American hymns are dealing with the trauma that people experienced in the Civil War. Well, another great hymn writer, the American woman, Fanny Crosby, who lived for 95 years, 1820 to 1915. Fanny was a prolific hymn writer, 8,000 hymns. 8,000 hymns. During her lifetime, 100 million copies of her hymns were in print. It's astonishing. She had so many hymns in print that publishers didn't want another hymn from Fanny Crosby. And so she had 200 pseudonyms that she used. It's mind-boggling how prolific she was. And yet she was blind and a housewife and a fairly not prominent person, but here she was writing all these great hymns that people absolutely loved. She was a household name in her time. And so let's sing one of her hymns, "Blessed Assurance." I should say a lot of the hymns that we're doing, and "Blessed Assurance" is one of them, come from the Episcopal hymnal, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which goes by the acronym "Leave Us" a lot. But "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is a rich resource of African American spirituals, but a lot of just traditional American hymnody. So let's do "Blessed Assurance." If I can find my copy. Fanny Crosby. Yeah, Crosby. You'll notice the lilting quality of this, which was really common for her. Another great river running through American hymnody is music that's called gospel music. And that one term actually encompasses a lot of different styles of music. So if you just say it's gospel music, you could be talking about the music of Ira Sankey, who was the musician that traveled with Dwight Moody on a lot of revivals. Dwight Moody was at the late 19th century, early 20th century, and the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago is a testimony to all of his activity. And Ira Sankey began writing gospel music just simply because it was tied up to the gospel. And some of his pieces are very familiar to us. In the Garden, and It Is Well With My Soul. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think of In the Garden as gospel music, but that's what Ira Sankey called it, as gospel music. But what many of us think of gospel music is a vast river of African American music. And it really started with Thomas Andrew Dorsey, not to be confused with Tommy Dorsey. Tommy Dorsey was a white band leader and a very good trombonist, and they lived about the same time, but not the same people. So Tommy Dorsey is different from Thomas Dorsey. Thomas Dorsey was an African American whose father was a Baptist preacher and his mother was the organist for the church. And his father was working at. And Thomas Dorsey kind of had a love-hate relationship with the church. And so he would be very religious, and then he would be very anti-religious. And when he was anti-religious, he was off being like a barroom pianist and having a good time. And then he went back and forth between these two worlds. And his wife, Nettie, was about to have a baby boy, and his wife died in childbirth. And then a couple days later, their son died. So Thomas Dorsey was grieving, and somebody came to his house and just said the words, "Oh, precious Lord." And that one sentence, that one comment made Thomas Dorsey think, "Precious Lord, take my hand." And those words then really resonated and became an expression of Thomas Dorsey's grief, losing his wife and his son. Precious Lord went on to become one of Martin Luther King's favorite hymns, and he used it at many of his gatherings, revivals, and political moments. And even the night that he was killed at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, he was standing on the balcony, and he said to somebody standing next to him, "I want Precious Lord to be sung tonight, and I want it sung real pretty." And that was the last thing he said. So it's a hymn that has really had a lot of impact for so many reasons. So let's sing just a verse of Precious Lord. Powerful words.
But it's even more powerful because you've told the story that goes with it.
Yeah, thanks.
I think there was a movie about writing it, about this. I'm trying to think what it was.
Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe view to it. Everything's
Very
on Google.
old, it's many years ago.
Oh, okay. That'd be worth watching. Yeah. Well, now we start to get to the point of the story that I can say I have personal experience with. Vatican II, everybody, 1962 to 1965. Rome was going through a series of convocations, meetings to come up with a reform movement of their own. Up to 1962, if you walked into a Catholic church, you would have heard everything in Latin, and the music was pretty much what you would have heard in the 9th century or the 13th century. There just wasn't a lot of change that had come to the Catholic churches. But that all changed in the 60s with Vatican II. So the first big change, the vernacular, the Mass was now said in the language of the people. And in the 1960s, they wanted to come up with a new style of hymnody that would be unique for this Vatican II revolution. Well, what was popular in the 1960s? What was popular music in the 1960s and 70s? The Beatles. I heard a lot of comments. Rock and roll. The Beatles.
Folk music.
Peter, Paul, and Mary. The Beatles. ABBA. Carly Simon. The Bee Gees. Well, you know what happened next? The guitar mass. Yep. And so the Catholic churches really embraced the music of the 60s and 70s. That everybody was hearing it on the radio, and they tried to make it their own. They also, there was some Catholic churches that turned to this rich Protestant hymn tradition at that time and try to embrace the Protestant hymn tradition. I said I could speak from personal experience. My first church where I was a music director was St. George Catholic Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was the early 80s. And so it was only about 15 years after Vatican II. And I was told that I was hired to be their music director simply because I was Protestant. and they wanted that Protestant music tradition to come to St. George Catholic Church in Cincinnati. So I did my best. I felt like I was cutting new grass for the very first time. But one of the hymns that came out of this Catholic revival, this new Catholic tradition, a hymn that was very popular in the 1970s and still is very popular today, is On Eagle's Wings. So let's all just sing a verse of On Eagle's Wings. And if you don't know the verse, you'll all know the refrain. Another tradition from the 20th century that became very prominent came from Taizé. And I refer to Taizé, first of all, as just what it is. It's a small town in the center of France. And during World War II, Brother Roger went to this town of Taizé, which was relatively calm during the war, and he started a monastery, but not just for Catholics. And it's important to know that Taizé is open to anyone of Christian faith, Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic, absolutely anyone. And Jay, you were there just this past summer. Yeah. And I was there about 25 years ago. And during the 70s and 80s, so many people from around the world were coming to Taizé that a composer by the name of Jacques Berthier began composing music just for the Taizé community when all these people that spoke different languages were visiting. And he chose Latin very frequently for the language of the pieces, but not because he was trying to make it Catholic. He was simply trying to find a language that everybody could participate in. And these are simple, short pieces of music. They're meant to be sung repeatedly, 10, 20, 30 times. And they're meant to really enter your heart. So Jacques Berthier said it was praying through singing. And he really wanted the music to become like a mantra. And so it would not just enter your mind, but enter your heart and your soul. And one of the most beautiful of the Taizé chants is Ubi Caritas. So let's just sing one time. We won't do it 30. One time for Ubi Caritas. We'll do it in Latin. Let's do it in Latin, everybody. Very short, very simple, but when you repeat it so many times, it really enters you. Being at the Taizé community, well, let me back up. I've done Taizé services, only music of Taizé. I've done that for about 20 years. And it's almost the entire service is music with 10 minutes of silence in the middle. And being at the Taizé, well, when you're leading one of those services, you always kind of ponder, well, have we done it enough times? Should we do it a couple more times? How do you know when to stop? You know, is 15 enough times? Is 20 enough times? Well, at the Taizé community, I realized that they have like a basketball scoreboard up on the wall. And you have a little book with maybe 20 or 30 of these little pieces in the booklet. And when the scoreboard number changes to number 14, you know that's the last time you're going to sing that one, and we're about to move on to number 14. So there's not much Holy Spirit involved in it. It's much more just watch the scoreboard, which was a little bit of a disappointment at Taizé community. Are they still doing that, Jane?
Yes, they are.
Another rich development in the 20s. I know I'm going a little over time here tonight.
Interesting, that's okay.
A rich development in the 20th century was the introduction of jazz into hymnody and worship services. And it was really St. Peter's Lutheran Church on Lexington Street in New York City. It's sometimes referred to as St. Peter's City Corp, because it's right below the City Corp high-rise skyscraper. Well, St. Peter's had a pastor there who was aware that in the 60s in New York, there were a lot of jazz musicians, and they didn't have a place to rehearse. And so he offered them free rehearsal space at St. Peter's in exchange for playing jazz in a worship service. And in 1965, they started jazz vespers at St. Peter's and jazz festivals and jazz concerts, lots of jazz happening in worship and in concerts. And it was really just, you need help, we need help, let's work together. And it took off at St. Peter's, and I think it lasted until just recently. Does anybody know if they're still doing their jazz vespers at St. Peter's? They are? They are? Okay, great. The other place jazz got started was also in 1965, the other side of the country, at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And Duke Ellington in 1965 did the first of several sacred concerts at Grace Cathedral, where he brought jazz into the cathedral. This was so revolutionary in 1965 that priests at Grace Cathedral were getting death threats.
Oh.
You did not bring jazz into a church, and even in a concert, and even if it's Duke Ellington. But I'm happy to say that my church in Chicago worked with the great jazz legend Dave Brubeck. And Dave Brubeck came to Fourth Presbyterian in Chicago to do 6 to 8 concerts. And I had the good fortune of doing, I think, 2 with Dave before he passed away. Dave Brubeck composed a lot of sacred jazz music, full oratorios. And so our choir would sing an oratorio with Dave and the jazz quartet. And then the second half would be just Dave and the quartet. But we partnered with Dave in a lot of those concerts. And in the 90s, we started bringing jazz into our worship services. We only did it quarterly at first, but then for about 20 years, Fourth Church in Chicago had a weekly jazz service. So we had a jazz quartet that played every Sunday afternoon. I'm really sad to say that they just ended that tradition a couple months ago. So I'm sorry to see that go away. But I think for those 20 years, Fourth Church and St. Peter's City Corp in New York were 2 of the very few places where you could hear jazz every week in worship services. You can now hear jazz here in Rochester. I want to give a shout out to 2 Saints Episcopal. They do it monthly. They're the first Friday of the month. I think the service is at 5 o'clock. And I went to it and really enjoyed it. They do a great job with jazz and worship. 2 Saints right here in Rochester. Well, who of you have you heard of U2? U2. Well, have you heard of Eucharist? I see a couple nods. Yep, Eucharist was a big thing in the 90s and the aughts, along with praise music, bringing rock bands into worship services. And that, especially in the 90s, praise music really had a wave through churches. I've been to several services with praise music, and it's done really well in the churches I went to. And the thing I noticed, and a lot of people have said the same thing, is going to a service with praise music is like going back to the Middle Ages, because all of the hymnody that we've been talking about was about participation and getting people to be part of the music. And praise music goes back to the Middle Ages because it's very hard to participate. And so you see hundreds and thousands of people just listening, much like in the Middle Ages with churches just listening to the music that the priest and the monks, the choirs were doing. So I could, there's a whole lecture right there on just praise music, but I'll save that one for later. One other tradition I want to briefly touch on and finish up here with is a tradition of world music. And there's been an explosion just in the past 10 to 20 years of music from around the world being published and becoming accessible to churches like St. Paul's right here in Rochester. And it's through the work of musicologists and publishers that are making this music accessible and available. And it's entering modern hymnals at a very, very quick rate. So we may not know it, but I'd like for us to finish by singing the South African. This is a Zulu and close up. Close. I have to click for that one. Yeah. If I do it a lot, I'll get better at it. But this is a hymn from South Africa that's become very popular. We are marching in the light of God. And let's sing it in English, everybody.
Thank you.
It will really enliven a worship service. I want to just finish with a few sort of general comments that really stand out to me. I'm astounded at how God uses a professor theologian in Germany who didn't even want to start a confrontation, let alone a reformation. And Martin Luther did just that. I'm astounded that a lawyer became so involved in hymnody. The King of England did his part. You know, Fanny Crosby, a blind housewife, a banker in Boston. God uses simple, ordinary people to do amazing things. And it really stands out in this story, this history of hymnody. The other thing that really strikes me is you see the trunk, the kind of the base of church music being chant. And from that trunk, and we see all these trees now bear their leaves, but from that trunk, branches spring out. Martin Luther, John Calvin, Isaac Watts, Charles Wesley. And then from those branches, you get Thomas Dorsey and Fanny Crosby and world music. But it's all connected. It's all alive. It's with us all the time. And here at St. Paul's and so many churches, there is just such a rich, vibrant voice of God through hymnody. And it is remarkable. It is absolutely incredible that we have 2,000 years of text and all this music that we draw from easily. We take it for granted, but it's all in front of us every single Sunday. And so I just so encourage you to be inspired by this rich tradition that we have in our hands every Sunday when we pick up those hymnals. And thank you very much.